The Stanley number 8 is an absolute beast of a plane. It is the biggest plane that Stanley ever made, and it is reasonably hard to come by. This particular model took me quite a while to find one in this condition. Of course, when I got it, it was covered in rust, and I've given it a bit of a clean up. So not a full restoration back to showroom or museum status, but a clean up back to user status, as in removed the rust, tightened up all the fixtures and fittings, given it a good wax. This particular model is with the corrugated bottom. To be perfectly honest, I don't find much difference between the corrugated bottom and the non-corrugated bottom. Supposedly the corrugated bottom was put in to provide less friction on your working material, because it is such a heavy plane. The idea being that the full surface area uncorrugated would provide, with the weight of the plane, too much grip on the material and be too hard to push through. To be perfectly honest, when you get the momentum going and these are polished up and waxed, they flow through regardless of whether they're corrugated or not. So to be perfectly honest, not sure if there's any value in looking for one over the other than the corrugated units do tend to fetch more than the non-corrugated units, possibly just because there was less of them and they have a rarity. But the question comes, why would you want a plane this long? Now, the whole idea of a plane this long is to flatten out a surface. It's to take the waves out of a surface and get it as flat as possible, because it rides over the wood with an extended flat base, which means the peaks over a valley are more likely to be picked up by the length of this plane, meaning that you don't cut into the valley and you just take shavings off the peaks, which then lowers the peaks down to the level of the valley the more passes you make, until you are able to take a full shaving end to end and you then have a flat surface. Now, yeah, you can do this with almost any plane, and the basic premise is the plane to flatten a surface should be the length in relation to the length of timber that you are flattening. So if you're only flattening, a piece of timber that is the size of a ring box, and it's the lid of a ring box that you want to flatten, theoretically a number 1 plane is suitable to be a flattening plane. If your surface area is larger, you'll move up in planes. Now, the number 5 is considered a jack plane because it covers all areas, and in most circumstances that's considered to be the smaller of the flattening planes. 6 slightly larger, 7 larger again, number 8 the largest. But why would you want a number 8? Well, if you're making something like the Shuffleboard or Sjoelbak, you are then talking about a surface area that is 2 meters in length. 2 meters in length with about 400 mil taken away at the bottom, a bit less than that, and about 1500 to the first bar. But from this point here back to here, you want that to be as flat as possible, and then you want it waxed, because you're going to be taking discs that don't weigh a lot, probably about 20 grams in total. They're about 13 mil thick and 50 mil wide. They're just made out of timber, in this case the same pine that the rest of it's made out of, and you want them to be able to easily slide from one end to the other without catching on anything. So you want this surface to be as smooth and flat as possible, so that when you wax it up, these things slide easily without much of a touch. You want them to be able to just slide that 2 meters and still have enough momentum that you can back them up against each other, so that if you don't have one come through but you have another shot, you can then force that through with your other shot without it being restricted by any friction of the board. Now, waves in the surface are going to cause the puck to move, and it'll ramp and jump, and that's the last thing you want. You want this to just sit and slide as smooth as possible. That is exactly the scenario where a number 8 plane comes into play. Because this surface is 2 meters long, and I won't actually put this on the surface because I don't want to mar it, but as you can see, a number 8 plane is rather small in comparison to that surface, but it is big enough to ensure that you get good solid shavings and create a very, very flat surface. This Sjoelbak has been made for someone who wanted a cheap one made up very quickly because they've got family over from Holland, and they did a quick internet search and found that the cheapest they could get one shipped to their home would be $400 or $500, and that was way more than what they wanted to spend for a bit of a Christmas, New Year's holiday with their family, and then something to play with friends afterwards that would be used here occasionally. So they commissioned me to make this for them a lot cheaper. So this one was made with the use of power tools more than anything, with routers just to cut the notches. Didn't pull out the table saw or anything, just used the hand saw to cut these because there's only a few of them to cut. It was very quick and easy to cut. The sides just glued and screwed on the side. The center section I've used biscuits all the way down to try and make sure that that stays in alignment as much as possible, then glued just to minimize the amount of shaving that I had to do. And it was glued with clamps and timbers across it, straight edges across it, to make sure that it was as flat as possible when I started, to minimize the amount of effort to then have to utilize to plane it down. Now, outside of the hand saw used because it was just quicker than setting up the table saw with a jig, used a hand router to route out the notches, cleaned up with a chisel, then the plane. The plane came into play for the largest part of building this, of making sure that surface was as flat as possible. And that's something that I would not have been able to achieve easily with an electric plane or an electric sander or even a hand sander. If I used a hand sander on a longer straight edge, I could have managed it, but it would have been a lot of work to do it. The plane just shaved off those peaks very easily to make this surface as flat as possible with minimal effort. Stanley number 8, that's why you want one. No matter whether you're collecting or using, happy hunting.